On the night of December 29th, 1610, György Thurzó rides for Csejte Castle with armed men at his back and a royal commission in his coat. He has spent the better part of a year arranging this moment. The witnesses gathered, the family quietly consulted, the outcome in its rough shape already settled before his horse reaches the gate. What he finds inside, he sets down within hours in a letter written to his own wife. A girl found dead, others found injured and confined. He orders the dead buried. He orders the lady of the castle confined to her own chambers. He does not call this an arrest, because under Hungarian law, a noblewoman of Elizabeth Bathory's rank cannot simply be seized, indicted, and tried like any other subject of the crown. He calls it something else. The distinction will matter for everything that follows. Welcome to Portraits of the Past, where we explore the lives of those whose legacies continue to echo through time. By the final days of 1610, the machinery assembled against Elizabeth Bathory, the debt the crown could not repay, the Palatine with ambitions in Transylvania, the testimony of 300 witnesses gathered across the preceding year, had reached the point of action, but Hungarian law complicated what that action could look like. Under the tripartitum, the codified body of noble privilege governing the kingdom, members of the high nobility were not subject to seizure, interrogation, or punishment by the ordinary machinery of justice. In theory, Elizabeth Bathory was entitled to formal indictment, to a hearing before her peers, to the chance to answer whatever was alleged against her in person. What unfolded at Csejte in the last days of 1610 and in the courtroom at Bitcha in the weeks that followed would test how much that theoretical protection was worth when a king wanted resolution and the men empowered to deliver one had already decided before any verdict what shape it would take. The raid survives in detail through a single source, Thurzó's own correspondence written in the hours and days immediately following. He describes arriving at Csejte to find one young woman dead, her body left where it had fallen, and others within the castle injured and held against their will. No independent witness corroborates the scene in his words. The man who found it was also the man who had spent the previous year building a legal and political case for exactly this discovery, and that fact does not make his account false, but it does mean the only surviving description of the raid's immediate aftermath comes from someone with every reason to describe it in the most damning possible terms. This is not an argument that the dead girl did not exist. It is an acknowledgement of how thin the evidentiary chain is at its most consequential point. Elizabeth Bathory herself was not arrested in any formal legal sense. She was confined to her own rooms in her own castle by order of a Palatine acting under royal commission, but without the indictment, trial, or sentence that Hungarian noble privilege required. She would never be formally charged. She would never stand before a court. She would never be permitted in any surviving document to answer the allegations against her in her own voice. The men around her were not so fortunate. On January 2nd, 1611, a tribunal convened at Bitcha, a castle some distance from Csejte, where Thurzó held both judicial standing and a more controllable venue, to try 4 of Elizabeth Bathory's household servants, Dorothea Szentes and Ilona Jó, both longtime members of the household. János Uvary, known as Fichko, a manservant, and Katalin Benecki, whose role in the household appears in the surviving record more peripheral than the other three. The court drew on the depositions gathered across 1610. Testimony from villagers, minor clergy, and castle staff, much of it second-hand, almost none of it cross-examined in any sense a modern court would recognize, and on confessions extracted from the four defendants themselves, under conditions the surviving trial record does not shy away from naming as torture. This is not a later inference. The use of judicial torture to extract confession from low-status defendants was a recognized, legally sanctioned feature of the period's criminal procedure, applied here as it was applied elsewhere in the kingdom. What it means for the reliability of what Dorothea Sentes and Ilona Yo said under those conditions is a question the trial record raises and does not answer. On January 7th, the court delivered its verdicts. Dorothea Sentes and Ilona Yo were sentenced to have their fingers torn from their hands with heated pincers before being burned alive. János Uvary was beheaded, his body burned afterward. Katalin Benecki received the lightest sentence of the four, life imprisonment, on the apparent judgment that her involvement had been the most limited or the most coerced. The sentences were carried out. Elizabeth Bathory was tried for nothing, and so was sentenced to nothing, in the formal sense. What happened to her instead was negotiated, not adjudicated, in the months surrounding the servant's trial, largely along the lines already laid down in her family's private dealings with Thurzó the previous autumn. King Matthias, by several accounts, wanted public trial and execution. A public trial would also have triggered formal confiscation of the entire Nadezhdy Bathory estate by the crown. What occurred instead served the family's narrower interests. She was confined without trial to a set of rooms within her own castle at Csejte, her windows and the door to her chambers walled up, with only a small opening left for food and air to pass. The popular tradition that she was entombed in total darkness, sealed from all human contact, overstates what the documentary record actually supports. What is well attested is severe, indefinite confinement, not total burial alive. She remained there for the rest of her life. The crown's outstanding debt to the Nadezhdy estate, which this series has already traced to the financing of the long Turkish War, was not pursued further after the case concluded. A sequence of events no serious historian disputes, even as historians remain divided on how much that financial relief functioned as the goal of the proceedings rather than their convenient byproduct. She died at Csejte on August 21, 1614, found by a guard in circumstances no surviving document describes beyond the fact and date of her death. She was first buried in the local church at Csejte. Local objection to the burial, the precise nature and intensity of which is not fully documented, led to the relocation of her remains sometime afterward, though sources disagree on where she was ultimately laid to rest. One further point deserves direct address because the legend has handled it so carelessly. The number of Elizabeth Bathory's alleged victims, as reported in popular retellings, ranges as high as 650. That figure does appear in the trial record itself, but only at one remove. It comes from the testimony of a servant named Susanna, who claimed that a court official, Jakab Silvasi, had seen a register among Bathory's private papers listing that number. The register was never produced. Silvasi, when he gave his own testimony, never mentioned it at all. The court did not proceed on 650. The formal count it acted on was 80. None of this proves the underlying allegations false. It means the figure most associated with her name today rests on a single second-hand claim that was never substantiated even within the proceedings that produced it. The documented timeline of this period is solid. Thurzó's raid on Csejte occurred in the final days of December 1610. The trial of Dorottya Szentes, Ilona Jó, János Uvary, and Katalin Benecki took place at Báthory in early January 1611, concluded with verdicts on January 7th, and those verdicts were carried out. Elizabeth Bathory was never formally indicted, tried, or sentenced by any Hungarian court. She remained confined at Csejte Castle without trial until her death on August 21, 1614. The crown's debt to the Nadasdy estate ceased to be pursued in the aftermath. None of this is seriously disputed among historians working from primary sources. What remains genuinely contested is harder to summarize cleanly, and that difficulty is itself part of the historical truth here. Whether the testimony gathered in 1610 reflects a pattern of genuine and sustained lethal cruelty, a smaller core of real abuse inflated by rumor and coerced confession, or something closer to fabrication assembled to serve a political and financial outcome already decided, this question does not have a consensus answer among the scholars who have examined the surviving depositions most closely. The scale of the allegations, as transmitted by popular legend, is not supported by the court's own findings. The figure of 650 originates in a single piece of second-hand trial testimony, never substantiated even at the time, rather than in the official count the court actually acted on. What the documented record does establish, without serious dispute, is that the legal process which ended Elizabeth Bathory's public life denied her the formal hearing that her own kingdom's law on paper guaranteed her, and that the men who arranged her confinement had reasons of their own, independent of whatever she had or had not done, to want the matter resolved exactly as it was resolved. Strip away the blood-bathing legend, and what remains is not a simple story of innocence restored. It is something less comfortable, a case where real cruelty, real political opportunism, and a legal system willing to bend around a powerful family's convenience are all plausibly present at once, and the surviving record does not let us cleanly separate one from the others. Elizabeth Bathory was never permitted to answer for herself. Neither in the end is anyone reading the archive 4 centuries later permitted a clean verdict. What she did, what was done to her, and what was simply convenient for everyone but her, these remain 3 different questions, and the documents we have were never going to answer all 3. Every portrait has more behind it. If you want to dive deeper into lives like this, to discover more detail, more context, and more of what didn't make this episode, you can explore the range of portraits of the past ebooks that are available now. Link in the description and bio. The paint is dry on this chapter, but the archives are vast. Subscribe and return to portraits of the past. The next exhibit awaits.